How's it going, everyone? This is MindBlank and welcome back to my channel, where today I'll be trying to answer the question that I popped in my previous Kaby Lake overclocking video, and that is, how does a 5 GHz Core i7 7700K Kaby Lake CPU perform? Rather interesting, so let's find out. There are no established statistics on the internet right now, but it seems that a fair amount of Kaby Lake 7700 and 7600K processors are able to hit 5 GHz. By a fair amount, I'd guesstimate that it's around 40% of CPUs sold. I also expect better batches at first and then worse as time progresses, so this percent will probably go down a bit in the future, but right now 5 GHz is a tangible thing on a nice number of CPUs. Thing is with Kaby Lake and 5 GHz that you are going to need a very nice performing air or water cooler. I wouldn't go as far as to say you need a custom water loop, but this thing is pretty hard due to reasons that I will not cover again. See my initial overclocking video for talks about glue generated gaps and not the actual TIM used. Most chips will also require a D-lid, which is a no-no for most of you out there, so there's these two aspects before going forward with the Kaby Lake purchase. But with that out of the way, I want to take an in-depth look at the performance of Kaby Lake, comparing it to my Haswell i7 4790K. So in this sense, I set up the following testing methodology. We're gonna test clock for clock at a reasonable and attainable Devil's Canyon frequency, 4.7 GHz that is, and also include the 5 GHz Kaby. We're also going to test on both Nvidia and AMD, so I picked my AIO RX 480 running at 1465 GPU, 8500 MHz memory, and the fastest card I have at hand right now, a GTX 1070, which I've overclocked to 2100 MHz GPU and 8600 MHz memory just to make things as CPU limited as possible. Also testing at 1080p in the 6 AAA titles, which are easily the most CPU dependent at this time. Just before going forward with this, I want to specify that I'm running fast RAM on both platforms, and that's DDR3 2400 MHz CL13 on the Haswell and DDR4 3000 MHz CL15 on the Kaby. This also plays a part in performance, and I'll cover this in more detail in a future video, but let's see how things look in a couple of synthetic benches first. First off is Cinebench R15, which is a fair way of measuring CPU performance, and we're looking at an obvious and expected lead of Kaby at both clock for clock and at 5 GHz. Nothing really to say here, so we are moving on to IDA 64 FPU Julia benchmarks, where we see the same thing repeating itself. Big shocker, right? Same for the Ray Trace benchmark, so nothing earth-shattering here. Moving on to more real-life tests, we can take a look at WinRAR's built-in benchmark, and this is something that you will feel when zipping or unzipping files. And an even more practical test, Handbrake, encoding a 1 minute and 56 second video from 4K to 1080p at an average bitrate of 1650 kilobits per second. Well, here we see a definite boost from the 5.0 GHz Kaby Lake, which shaves off 18 seconds. Is 18 seconds time defining? No, but it shows that Kaby Lake can flex its muscles really hard, and I was actually impressed by this since it's a 15% delta between the 4.7 4790K and the 5.0 Kaby, which is decent in my opinion. So finally, gaming benchmarks, the most important thing a CPU will ever run in its lifetime. 7 games tested, very CPU demanding all of them, but we're kicking off with the latest Battlefield 1 and the most repeatable and CPU heavy single player scene that I could find. As usual, we are using percent low frame rates instead of flat out minimums. I will re-explain what they are. In this case, they represent an average of the 5% lowest frame rates achieved during a test and are much more representative of minimum performance than just the bare minimum number. You will easily notice that the 4790K is easily maxing out the RX 480, and you will discover this rule throughout my tests with one minor exception. This is the reason that I've also included the overclocked GTX 1070 in the mix. So nothing really flashy to see here, and this is not much of a spoiler, but this is how things will look throughout the benchmarks. One quick thing to mention about Batman Arkham Knight is the fact that it is capped at 90 FPS, and this is why the averages stop at that mark on the GTX 1070 paired with the Kaby Lake. The only notable exception that sees better scaling on the RX 480 is GTA 5, which is very CPU demanding and intensive in its task of mimicking real life on the streets of Los Santos. The game did also feel smoother on the 5 GHz 7700K compared to the 4.7 GHz 4790K, but it's the only game in the test that reacted like this to raw CPU power. Of course, this is also valid for the GTX 1070, which sees its average frame rate improve by around 7%. Yeah, 7%. In case you were wondering, there is no game right now where we can speak of tremendous performance differences, so don't hold your breath for it. We also have some anomalies here with Rise of the Tomb Raider Geothermal Valley testing, where the 4790K was consistently better on the 5% low frames with both cards. I'm suspecting something to do with RAM speed and latency, but I'm not quite sure. I know exactly where these low frames are generated, and it's a place where GPU utilization plummets for both AMD and Nvidia cards, but it did so more on the KL than on the Haswell for some strange reason. Most of you might have already answered the question for yourself, and that is the should I upgrade question. I'll try to give you some guidelines and you can draw your own decisions. If you're running an Ivy or Sandy Bridge or older CPU and you only do gaming on your machine, then you can make the jump and not wait for Zen or other stuff. It will not disappoint, and you will also have a much better platform with USB 3.0 and 3.1, and GFF SSDs, USB Type-Cs, more PCIe lanes, faster DDR4 RAM, etc. If you're running a Haswell or Devil's Canyon, well, it's up to you. This is clearly faster, but it's a far cry from having a jaw-dropping effect on you. Refer to my previous comment regarding the better and updated platform as a plus, but besides that, it's very limited for gaming and borderline noticeable for other non-gaming related but CPU heavy tasks, like editing for example. But if you're running a Skylake, then I don't know why you'd want to upgrade to KL. There's only two reasons. First is that your chip is stuck around 4.4 GHz like I've seen on some people and want to try 5.0 or above on KL, or the second reason is that you are a huge Netflix consumer and want 4K streaming. Kaby Lake is the only platform on the PC where Netflix is able to stream at 4K at the moment. There is, however, a third reason, regardless of the CPU you are currently running, as long as you are passionate about overclocking. This is the most fun I've had with overclocking an Intel CPU in quite some time. Think of it as Sandy Bridge refined throughout the years, because this chip will generally boot at whatever frequency you set within reason, as long as you throw the volts at it and can cool it properly. It's like a rubber band, and this is what makes this a damn fun overclocking experience. I want to see your comments, questions and suggestions down below. Thank you for supporting this channel by subscribing, and see you next time everybody. Bye bye.